The Human Cycle by Sri Aurobindo. Chapter 13. Reason and Religion. It would seem that reason is an insufficient, often an inefficient, even a stumbling, and at its very best a partially enlightened guide for humanity, in that great endeavor which is the real heart of human progress, and the inner justification of our existence as souls, minds, and bodies upon the earth. For that endeavor is not only the effort to survive and make a place for ourselves on the earth, as the animals do, not only having made to keep it and develop its best vital and egoistic or communal use for the efficiency and enjoyment of the individual, the family, or the collective ego, substantially as is done by the animal families and colonies, in beehive or anthill, for example, though in the larger, many-sided way of reasoning animals. It is also, and much more characteristically, of our human as distinguished from our animal element, the endeavor to arrive at a harmonized inner and outer perfection. And, as we find in the end, at its highest height, to culminate in the discovery of the divine reality behind our existence, and the complete and ideal person within us, and the shaping of human life in that image. But if that is the truth, then neither the Hellenic ideal of an all-round philosophic, aesthetic, moral, and physical culture, governed by the enlightened reason of man, and led by the wisest minds of a free society, nor the modern ideal of an efficient culture and successful economic civilization governed by the collective reason and organized knowledge of mankind can be either the highest or the widest goal of social development. The Hellenic ideal was roughly expressed in the old Latin maxim, a sound mind in a sound body. And by a sound body, the ancients meant a healthy and beautiful body, well fitted for the rational use and enjoyment of life. And by a sound mind, they meant a clear and balanced reason and an enlightened and well-trained mentality, trained in the sense of ancient, not of modern education. It was not to be packed with all available information and ideas, cast in the mold of science and a rational utility, and so prepared for the efficient performance of social and civic needs and duties, for a professional avocation or for an intellectual pursuit. Rather, it was to be cultured in all its human capacities, intellectual, moral, aesthetic, trained to use them rightly and to range freely, intelligently, and flexibly in all questions and in all practical matters of philosophy, science, art, politics, and social living. The ancient Greek mind was philosophic, aesthetic, and political. The modern mind has been scientific, economic, and utilitarian. The ancient ideal laid stress on soundness and beauty, and sought to build up a fine and rational human life. The modern lays very little or no stress on beauty, prefers rational and practical soundness, useful adaptation, just mechanism, and seeks to build up a well-ordered, well-informed, and efficient human life. Both take it that man is partly a mental, partly a physical being, with the mentalized physical life for his field, and reason for his highest attribute and his highest possibility. But if we follow to the end the new vistas opened by the most advanced tendencies of a subjective age, we shall be led back to a still more ancient truth and ideal that overtops both the Hellenic and the modern levels. For we shall then seize the truth that man is a developing spirit, trying here to find and fulfill itself in the forms of mind, life, and body. And we shall perceive, luminously growing before us, the greater ideal of a deeply conscious, self-illumined, self-possessing, self-mastering soul in a pure and perfect mind and body. The wider field it seeks will be not the mentalized physical life with which man has started, but a new spiritualized life, inward and outward, by which the perfected internal figures itself in a perfected external living. Beyond man's long, intelligent effort towards a perfected culture and a rational society, there opens the old religious and spiritual ideal, the hope of the kingdom of heaven within us, and the city of God upon earth. But if the soul is the true sovereign, and if its spiritual self-finding, its progressive, largest, widest, integral fulfillment by the power of the Spirit are to be accepted as the ultimate secret of our evolution, then, since certainly the instinctive being of man below reason is not the means of attaining that high end, and since we find that reason also is an insufficient light and power, there must be a superior range of being with its own proper powers, liberated soul faculties, a spiritual will and knowledge higher than the reason and intelligent will, by which alone an entire conscious self-fulfillment can become possible to the human being. We must remember that our aim of self-fulfillment is an integral unfolding of the divine within us, a complete evolution of the hidden divinity in the individual soul and the collective life. Otherwise, we may simply come back to an old idea of individual and social living, which had its greatness, but did not provide all the conditions of our perfection. That was the idea of a spiritualized typal society. It proceeded upon the supposition that each man has his own peculiar nature, which is born from and reflects one element of the divine nature. The character of each individual, his ethical type, his training, his social occupation, his spiritual possibility must be formed or developed within the conditions of that peculiar element. The perfection he seeks in this life must be according to its law. The theory of ancient Indian culture, its practice, as is the way of human practice, did not always correspond to the theory worked upon this supposition. It divided man in society into the fourfold order, and at once spiritual, psychic, ethical, and economic order of the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, practically the spiritual and intellectual man, the dynamic man of will, the vital, hedonistic, and economic man, the material man. The whole society organized in these four constituent classes represented the complete image of the creative and active Godhead. A different division of the typal society is quite possible. But whatever the arrangement or division, the typal principle cannot be the foundation of an ideal human society. Even according to the Indian theory, it does not belong either to the periods of man's highest attainment or to the eras of his lowest possibility. It is neither the principle of his ideal age, his age of the perfected truth, Satya Yuga, Krita Yuga, in which he lives according to some high and profound realization of his divine possibility, nor of his Iron Age, the Kali Yuga, in which he collapses towards the life of the instincts, impulses, and desires, with the reason degraded into a servant of this nether life of man. This too precise order is rather the appropriate principle of the intermediate ages of his cycle, in which he attempts to maintain some imperfect form of his true law, his dharma, by willpower and force of character in the Treta, by law, arrangement, and fixed convention in the Dwapara. We have a footnote here. Therefore, it is said that Vishnu is the king in the Treta, but in the Dwapara, the arranger and codifier of the knowledge and the law. The type is not the integral man. It is the fixing and emphasizing of the generally prominent part of his active nature. But each man contains in himself the whole divine potentiality, and therefore the Shudra cannot be rigidly confined within his Shudrahood, nor the Brahmin in his Brahmanhood. but each contains within himself the potentialities and the need of perfection of his other elements, of a divine manhood. In the Kali age, these potentialities may act in a state of crude disorder, the anarchy of our being, which covers our confused attempt at a new order. In the intermediate ages, the principle of order may take refuge in a limited perfection, suppressing some elements to perfect others. But the law of the Satya age is the large development of the whole truth of our being in the realization of a spontaneous and self-supported spiritual harmony that can only be realized by the evolution, in the measure of which our human capacity, in its enlarging cycles, becomes capable of it, of the spiritual ranges of our being, and the unmasking of their inherent light and power, their knowledge, and their divine capacities. We shall better understand what may be this higher being and those higher faculties if we look again at the dealings of the reason with the trend towards the absolute in our other faculties, in the divergent principles of our complex existence. Let us study especially its dealings with the supra-rational in them and the infra-rational, the two extremes between which our intelligence is some sort of mediator. The spiritual or supra-rational is always turned at its heights towards the absolute. In its extension, living in the luminous infinite, its special power is to realize the infinite in the finite, the eternal unity in all divisions and differences. Our spiritual evolution ascends, therefore, through the relative to the absolute, through the finite to the infinite, through all divisions to oneness. Man, in his spiritual realization, begins to find and seize hold on the satisfying intensities of the absolute in the relative, feels the large and serene presence of the infinite in the finite, discovers the reconciling law of a perfect unity in all divisions and differences. The spiritual will, in his outer as in his inner life and formulation, must be to effect a great reconciliation between the secret and eternal reality and the finite appearances of a world which seeks to express, and in expressing seems to deny it. Our highest faculties, then, will be those which make this possible, because they have in them the intimate light and power and joy by which these things can be grasped in direct knowledge and experience, realized and made normally and permanently effective in will, communicated to our whole nature. The infra-rational, on the other hand, has its origin and basis in the obscure infinite of the inconscient. It wells up in instincts and impulses, which are really the crude and more or less haphazard intuitions of a subconscious physical vital, emotional, and sensational mind and will in us. Its struggle is towards definition, towards self-creation, towards finding some finite order of its obscure knowledge and tendencies. But it has also the instinct and force of the infinite from which it proceeds. It contains obscure, limited, and violent velities that move it to grasp at the intensities of the absolute and pull them down, or some touch of them, into its finite action. But because it proceeds by ignorance and not by knowledge, it cannot truly succeed in this more vehement endeavor. The life of the reason and intelligent will stands between that upper and this nether power. On one side it takes up and enlightens the life of the instincts and impulses, and helps it to find on a higher plane the finite order for which it gropes. On the other side, it looks up towards the absolute, looks out towards the infinite, looks in towards the one, but without being able to grasp and hold their realities. For it is able only to consider them with a sort of derivative and remote understanding, because it moves in the relative and itself limited and definite. It can act only by definition, division, and limitation. These three powers of being, the suprarational, rational, and infrarational, are present, but with an infinitely varying prominence in all our activities. The limitations of the reason become very strikingly, very characteristically, very nakedly apparent when it is confronted with that great order of psychological truths and experiences which we have hitherto kept in the background. The religious being of man and his religious life. Here is a realm at which the intellectual reason gazes with the bewildered mind of a foreigner who hears a language of which the words and the spirit are unintelligible to him, and sees everywhere forms of life and principles of thought and action which are absolutely strange to his experience. He may try to learn this speech and understand this strange and alien life, but it is with pain and difficulty, and he cannot succeed unless he has, so to speak, unlearned himself and become one in spirit and nature with the natives of this celestial empire. Till then, his efforts to understand and interpret them in his own language, and according to his own notions, end at the worst in a gross misunderstanding and deformation. The attempts of the positive critical reason to dissect the phenomena of the religious life sound to men of spiritual experience like the prattle of a child who is trying to shape into the mold of his own habitual notions the life of adults, or the blunders of an ignorant mind which thinks fit to criticize patronizingly or adversely the labors of a profound thinker or a great scientist. At the best, even this futile labor can account for only the externals of the things it attempts to explain. The spirit is missed. The inner matter is left out, and as a result of that capital omission, even the account of the externals is left without real truth, and has only an apparent correctness. The unaided intellectual reason, faced with the phenomena of the religious life, is naturally apt to adopt one of two attitudes, both of them shallow in the extreme, hastily presumptuous and erroneous. Either it views the whole thing as a mass of superstition, a mystical nonsense, a farrago of ignorant, barbaric survivals. That was the extreme spirit of the rationalist, now happily, though not dead, yet much weakened and almost moribund. Or it patronizes religion, tries to explain its origins, to get rid of it by the process of explaining it away. Or it labors gently or forcefully to reject or correct its superstitions, crudities, absurdities, to purify it into an abstract nothingness, or persuade it to purify itself in the light of the reasoning intelligence. Or it allows a role, leaves it perhaps for the edification of the ignorant, admits its value as a moralizing influence, or its utility to the state for keeping the lower classes in order, even perhaps tries to invent that strange chimera, a rational religion. The former attitude has, on its positive side, played a powerful part in the history of human thought, has even been of a considerable utility in its own way. We shall have to note briefly hereafter how and why, to human progress, and in the end even to religion. But its intolerant negations are an arrogant falsity, as the human mind has now sufficiently begun to perceive. Its mistake is like that of a foreigner who thinks everything in an alien country absurd and inferior, because these things are not his own ways of acting and thinking, and cannot be cut out by his own measures or suited to his own standards. So the thoroughgoing rationalist asks the religious spirit, if it is to stand, to satisfy the material reason, and even to give physical proof of its truths, while the very essence of religion is the discovery of the immaterial spirit and the play of a supraphysical consciousness. So, too, he tries to judge religion by his idea of its externalities, just as an ignorant and obstreperous foreigner might try to judge a civilization by the dress, outward color of life, and some of the most external peculiarities in the social manners of the inhabitants. That in this he errs in company with certain of the so-called religious themselves may be his excuse, but cannot be the justification of his ignorance. The more moderate attitude of the rational mind has also played its part in the history of human thought. Its attempts to explain religion have resulted in the compilation of an immense mass of amazingly ingenious perversions, such as certain pseudo-scientific attempts to form a comparative science of religion. It has built up, in the approved modern style, immense facades of theory with stray bricks of misunderstood facts for their material. Its mild condonations of religion have led to superficial phases of thought which have passed quickly away and left no trace behind them. Its efforts at the creation of a rational religion, perfectly well-intentioned, but helpless and unconvincing, have had no appreciable effect and have failed like a dispersing cloud.